Back in the days when my great-grandfather worked ranches throughout this honored country, life was pretty simple, cut and dry. Good, it was good. Bad, it was bad. Black and white. Today, not so. There's a lot of gray. With all the changes in technology calling out for our attention, has our life really gotten that much better? I'm excited to share with you a story about a man whose life was in disarray due to his bondage to addictions. It may sound like entertainment, but it's a true story. Don Reed Sr. is a very successful businessman. He would find himself living a double life, lying to both his family and, more importantly, himself. On the inside, he was completely lost and empty.
The only time I really thought about my wife when I was in Las Vegas, or even called her, is to want to know how the motel was doing. My life was engulfed in that total lifestyle that I was living. So really, I'd check on the kids, but I'm in another world. That's the only way I can say it, of living. It's not natural, no. But when you're possessed, like I was, your life is completely involved in all these things. Down deep inside, the only time I hated myself really when I would say, I would go home at night after I've gone for a week and done some things that were all wrong, all the things I talk about. The only thing I start hating myself indirectly is when I'd lay down in bed at night and I'd say, try to reason out, why am I doing this? I really wanted to stop. I really did. But I didn't know how to stop. When your mind was so engrossed with all these things of the world, I can honestly say, I wish I could say and lie, but I cannot lie, because I knew nothing except the desires that satisfied myself, my own personal self.
This is a tragic and an amazing love story about redemption and an option that would never leave or forsake him. Now let's start at the beginning.
I grew up in the 1940s in a normal family. Well, you might call it abnormal because there was 14 of us. I happened to be the 11th child of the 12 children, and our family was really close for the number of people.
Don is my uncle. My mom was a twin. Maud and Myrtle were the twins, and then they were down the ladder of the 12 kids. They were at the very bottom with Uncle Don below them, and then Uncle Merle was the baby.
My mother and dad were poor parents, and they would, on payday, if I remember, my dad would fight with my mother, and he'd pound his fist on the counter at the house, and he'd say, where'd the money go? Well, man, he was only making maybe $100 a week, and she'd making the house payment and buying the food and so forth, and my mother would cry. When my mother and dad fought, I would retreat into my dark garage all by myself and do things that young kids do growing up. It was just part of my insecurity, part of my things that were having me problems with at that particular. That was my place to retreat. When my mother and dad would fight on payday, that was my escapism to go to the garage, because I would hear my dad, just saying, where'd the money go? Where'd the money go? So that was my part of why I was running to that garage. And I believe at that particular time, fear or whatever, all these spirits started attacking me, and I was just desolate. I was unhappy because I was fearful my dad was going to hit my mother or so forth. When my sisters would walk around the house it stimulated me, and I sort of, and I ran into the garage, and which is a thing that young boys do at an early age. As a result, I was in that dark garage, and I created a very emotional problem.
Childhood experiences can lead to adult behavior in most cases. It's called environmental influences. Say, for instance, the father is an alcoholic, and the son witnesses him drinking every day, arguing with his wife, the child's mother. This is emotionally effective and destructive in a young person's upbringing.
I would run down to the grade school where I was raised and play basketball for a while, or I would run down to the pool room. My dad was such a good dad, but he didn't make that much money, but he built a little box on the wall, and it was 11 children. One had already passed away. So he put 11 boxes in there, little square boxes, and he laid it right on the wall, hanging on the wall, and he put a little slit in the middle of each name, and he would put nickels and dimes and pennies in there to accumulate for Christmas, so we kids would have some money at Christmas. When situations that my mother and dad would happen, the emotional part of me would stir up, and I would go and take a knife and take the box down off the wall and stick one of the knives in there and slide out the nickels and pennies so that I could run down to the pool room and play the pool. All these spirits, or whatever you want to call them, in my particular life had an effect later on in my life.
Addictions usually start in childhood and don't affect everybody in the same way, but definitely impact emotionally and or mentally the person's life.
Sometimes the obvious truth is right in front of us, in our path, staring us down. Maybe we're just too young to notice it, or we choose not to.
And I just kept on trying to get away from it, but it had already been planted in my life from my childhood or so forth.
1 out of 5 teenagers experience gambling-related problems. The fastest growing group of pathological gamblers in the United States today are high school and college students because of the credit cards that are so readily available to them and because of the internet.
I know that my gambling and my fear and all that insecurities, all these started at a particular age when I would either run down to the school and start playing basketball, which I was at 6th grade. I started making the first team at 6 to 9. I played the first team. I was sending records even in grade school. They even kept records at that particular time. Well, when I was shooting basketball and I was getting good, that was my outlet. That was my way of escaping away from my family situation. So I ran down there and played basketball. And the reason you become good at any sport is playing at it. So naturally, I spent a lot of my time right on the little basketball court.
Don Reed, I know I knew him, but he's a couple years older than me, you know. But I always knew that he was a great athlete. And I know in high school when he played, my brother Joe played on the same team with him, but Don was a star. I mean, Don he was a natural. He just walked out on that court when he fired that ball up, it was going. I mean, you know, it's just like people try to be something as hard as they can, but it never works. But he was just a natural.
When I become a senior then, I decided I wanted to be an all-state baseball, basketball, football. So guess what? I went out for football. I hurt my knee, but I had already established a contract with the college at that particular time.
I know that he went out for football, which he shouldn't have, and I'm still going to remind him about that because, man, we all were his fans. He went out and he hurt his knee, and of course, it slowed him down, and he was still good, but, you know, he hurt himself when he went out for football.
I was really looking for success in myself. I had visions of me now being a great basketball player because I loved the sports, and I knew that I was really good.
When you're an athlete like that, it becomes your entire being. I mean, you eat, drink, and sleep being an athlete. The women that you're with, they're with you because you're an athlete, most of them. The friends you have are your friends because you're an athlete. So you're driven by that. You know, you eat, drink, and sleep it your whole life. I mean, I know Dawn was the same way as I was. We're all that way. We're from diapers up through junior high, through high school, through college, and you know, I did make it to the NFL for several years. So I understand that process. It becomes you. It's not even the process anymore. It just consumes your life.
All my life was wrapped around sports. Sport was my entire life. I had no desire except to make sure that Don Reed was making the top position, whatever it was. It was strictly sports was my God.
Our identities get formed largely from the way that we're brought up, with the environments that we're around, the atmospheres that we're around. And so if we're in an environment that is about me and driven about what can I get out of this situation, we're going to grow up and we're going to find that our identity is internal. It's self-focused and about me. What can I get? How do I do this? Because that's what we've learned. And so when we're raised up without God in our lives, we find those types of things. And so if you have parents who have made their identities about themselves, if you have moms who are about their kids, if you have dads who are about their jobs, and they're using different things to try and say, this is who I am, you're going to grow up and find that, okay, what is it that I do well? Because that's now who I'm going to become, and that's going to become my identity.
After 2 years in college and my leg went completely bad, I did not want to stay at Westminster College because my basketball career actually was over, and I didn't want to take a handout at the college. When it came to the point at Westminster College that I couldn't perform like I should because of my knee, even though I was able to play basketball in Madison Square Garden, Westminster, even though I did, my motivation now, my success was sort of tore down. So I'm still fighting the spirit of my childhood experiences, all the problems that I had, but my motivation now was shut down. I had failed as a basketball player because of my leg. It affected my baseball ability, my trial with the Pirates. Everything was falling. My whole empire was tumbling down.
I think that's what happened to both of us, and that's what happens with a lot of athletes. When you experience that, I don't know how to explain this in any other terms except this. It's like a death. Okay, you're an athlete your whole life, and that's all you know. You eat, drink, and sleep an athlete. People know you as being an athlete. But then if you suffer an injury, all of a sudden you go into this deep depression because you have identity loss. And that's what happened to Dawn.
So I left the college, and I turned around again and I went to the Army, and then my gambling, sex, and so forth started manifesting again when I went into the Army.
When that identity gets stripped from you, something happens and that piece of you is now gone. You're now struggling because that piece of you is gone. It's not about I'm who I am because of something else. It was I am who I am because I've made me.
And I went through the same personal thing. I mean, I played, about 3 years in the NFL, was rated the #1 center in the entire country when I was in college, coming out my senior year. I mean, that was my life. That was who I was. And I had an injury, and that's what ended my career. And then after that, I just fell into deep depression and drug addiction and just the whole way. It's so similar to Don's story to me. It's unbelievable. But he went through the exact same things I did, and I went through what he went through. So I understand that one injury, you suffer the loss of your identity. And that's why people fall into that deep depression, or that you're trying to find who you really are. So you're running around with sex addiction or drug addiction or opioids now, and the whole drug problem of how bad it is. It's an epidemic. And that's why people are looking for it, if they're an athlete or not. They're looking for that peace that can only be found in Jesus.
Before I went to the Army, I met my girlfriend, Donna, and she was sending me money during the time I was in the Army. I was losing my paycheck from paycheck to paycheck, going away for weekends, and she didn't know all the problems that I had with gambling at that particular time.
Each of us is given the gift of free will, allowing self-determination for the path we choose. That's quite amazing when you consider the implications, and so profound. Dawn made choices, many he would live to regret.
I would leave the Army on weekends, and I would go in town on my leave that we were allowed for weekends, and I would gamble or drink the whole weekend in places, undesirable places. You met all kind of people, you could all kind of card games, but most of the time I was getting in undesirable lifestyles, you know, whiskey, women, and booze and so forth, and the gambling.
The lottery, their slogan, $1 and a dream. It used to be said, hey, this is a way to get out of the ghetto. Not anymore. They're selling hope now. This lottery, put your hope in this lottery. You see, you don't have to get an education, you don't have to work, because we've come up with a game you can play, and your problems are going to be over.
Donna come out to Colorado with her parents, and that's where we got married. And you know, we found a house where the lady said if we took care of some dogs out there, we could have it rent free, and she gave us a car. And we was there one night at 6 o'clock at night, sitting in her house, which is about maybe 200 yards from the house where she let us have free. And all of a sudden there was an explosion. And we ran up, cleared up to the house to see, and it was engulfed completely in fire at the foot of Pikes Peak. And by the time the fire department got there, they didn't even attempt to save the house. And naturally, I sent Donna back to Pennsylvania here because we had no home to stay in. Donna was pregnant, and she went back home. I served out the remaining time of my service, and then I went back home and lived with my wife at her parents' in Greenville, Pennsylvania. Then the addiction of gambling and all the other addictions that went with it was actually increasing as I started living with her and her parents. Somehow I had to find a job, and I did locate a job with a local accounting firm, and they in turn told me to go back to college, so I in turn went back to college to get my degree in accounting. We lived with Donna's parents for a while. Then we bought a home on Moorfield Road in Hermitage, Pennsylvania. I was drinking heavily at the time when my two children were being raised in my home on Moorfield Road in Hermitage, Pennsylvania.
I knew Don when I was very young, before he was a Christian. We lived in the neighborhood, and I had heard about him and to kind of keep away.
I ended up starting into an accounting practice with the name of Robert E. Mort, a company. And I worked there for 3 or 4 years. And everything was going real good, but in the meantime, I was still drinking and gambling. All these addictions were going on, pretty well hiding it from my wife, Donna.
Donna, I knew her about the same time, but I really got to be close to her when we moved next door to her.
In the early days, it was good. He was a good father. He was a father to many kids in the neighborhood, too.
All of a sudden one year, I decided to go into my own business. So I went to my boss and told him, I'm not going to take one of your clients. And I started in business, and I turned around and built my business real good. I rented the places in Hermitage, Pennsylvania, and my business grew and grew. And at that particular time, I was taken out entertaining people at night, again, drinking, gambling, and all the addictions that I had. And my boss and I would go out and so forth, and I grew my practice then, okay? Even though he was no longer my boss, but he was still my friend. He appreciated the fact that I didn't take any of his business.
Behavioral addictions really, whenever they get locked into us, and we can look at the idea of identity. Behavioral addictions stem out of our need for identity. Who are we going to belong to? How are we going to belong to that group? And so behavioral addictions become that outgrowth. And sometimes people look at them and it's not a big deal. Maybe it's sports, but you've become obsessed with sports, but because it's not considered a taboo thing to do, nobody cares. Some things are more taboo, and some things are more destructive.
My emotions, my conscience, my satisfaction was all satisfaction of me. I took care of my family. I was a good family man to an extent on that. My children, I took them there an ordinary while, but I still, my life was revolved around the emotional feelings of gambling, alcohol, women, and all the things that I was doing.
Don and Donna, they were like coming and going a lot. I could see through, we lived like across from them with my parents, and the wild parties and the late night parties, and there was a lot of commotion, lots of cars everywhere, and just lots of noise. And I was told, not to go there as a child.
We had family reunions every year, and the men would always go to the bar, and the girls would stay with the kids at the pool, and he was always looking for fun, looking for a good time. Always very charismatic, always wanting to be the life of the party.
I did not have a good relationship with my dad in those years. He was a great father, let me say that. He was a great father, gave us the best of everything. He took us on nice vacations.
Addictions, regardless of how masked they are or how easily seen they are, tear us down, destroy us, and they grow from those early ages of just saying, okay, who am I? And when I do this, it feels good. And the better that makes me feel, then the more that I'm going to do that thing.
So I started out with nothing, and pretty soon my business just went so good, I decided one time, I was in an office right across the street from what they call a townhouse motel, and I looked at that motel from my office across the street, and I said, I'm going to buy that motel. Well, in 1972, I bought that motel for $300,000, which would be worth a lot of money today, and I moved my accounting practice then from the office across the street into the second floor of the motel. Now I get involved in more and more. I got involved not only in gambling, I got involved in a bar, a nightclub, and I had a contract with about 6 trucking companies in Hermitage, Pennsylvania, and as a result, my motel room is selling 30, 40, 50, 75 rooms a day, and what we called in my particular life story to say turnovers.
Things were going very well for a while, but the tavern life was really beginning of a big downfall, I believe, at that point in time.
My sons were bartending at the age of 10 or 12 or 14.
He had a nightclub up in Sharon, and I used to like to go there, and he'd step up and try to sing. I said, Don, you can't sing. He said, well, he would, he was in the world,
I had 7 licenses at that particular time. I had insurance license, accounting license. I took the New York Stock Exchange license. I took the CPA license. My business was just growing and growing. But my addiction to gambling on weekends, Donna was running my motel. She was running a real estate company. My kids were living one day at my home. The next day we were living in a motel. We were just like a bunch of vagabonds, my life. And my wife, Donna, did not really know how bad my gambling was at that particular time. I was running back and forth to these weekend poker games. I was absolutely, in my motel, my bar was filled because I had people that would sing. We call it just, I'd hand them the microphone and walk away, and I really had filled my bar. A man came in one day and said, Don, I got some free tickets to go to Las Vegas. Well, that was what I wanted. I wanted to go to Las Vegas, so I started lying to my wife. I said, well, I'm going to go out there and just see if we can do some business. First, I went on a junket. A junket, they pay your way out. You have to put up front money, which I did, and as a result, there was about 20 of us at that particular time, flew right from Vienna, Ohio, right into Las Vegas. Well, that was the first time. I started going to Vegas all by myself. I did not need anybody to take me out in the junket because they knew that I had some money. I knew I had a motel, and as a result, I could go free. So they flew myself out, and I went out there, and I started going to Vegas 3 or 4 or 5 times. How many times they would take me, I didn't have to pay nothing, paid my room, and I started gambling heavily out there.
The first time that I met Don and got to know him was when we visited at their house. Actually, it was through taxes. But Donna was there, and Donna I knew from high school. We both went to Hickory High, and she was 1 year behind me. But then Don kept stepping into the picture, and I heard some really tough things about him. And of course, Joni and I, being born-again Christians, we started praying for him and trying to bring him along.
People who are addicted to gambling, 62% of them will commit a crime. They will embezzle money, they will fraud, they will use theft, insurance fraud, 62%.
Things escalated during a period of time. That was helped by the fact that the economy made a downturn, business started going bad, the transportation industry stopped, the cash flow stopped into the business, which precipitated the chasing dollars here and there. The gambling escalated, the drinking escalated, the dark period escalated during that time. So it was in my age 16, 17 year period of time when that really happened.
I kept asking my wife to go to Las Vegas, but I didn't really want her to because I was satisfied the way I was going. But to pacify her, I kept asking her. Finally, she said she would go. So we arrived in Las Vegas, one of my flights that they paid my way out and back on. And we got in a motel, and of course, she went up and put the suitcase in the motel, and I, of course, went to the crap table, and I was playing blackjack and crap at the time.
How do I see my dad when he's at his worst? Well, do you have a week or two?
She came down to me and dressed in a beautiful outfit. She wanted to say, now you've been here for 4 hours, and she had went to the room and probably went swimming, and everything seemed pretty good. When she come to the table, she says, come on, honey, we're going to go to a floor show. The floor show was paid for, the booze was paid for, the food was paid for. So I said, no, I said, you go back upstairs and I'll be up in about 20 minutes.
He could be very mean, very abusive verbally, not physically so much, but he could get pretty wound up. And the scary thing is, you lived in fear, not knowing what's going to walk through the door. Is it going to be Don Reed or is it going to be the monster?
She called around finally. She said, get up here. I want to go out for supper. So I went upstairs there and walked into the room, and my personality just changed. I was down maybe $5,000, which would be an awful lot of money today.
He can flip on a dime, whether he's got worries about the alcohol, or if he's drunk, or whether he's got worries about all the gambling he just lost, or the problems with his marriage. There's so many things that could just set him off that he would just not really be there with you mentally. His mind was somewhere else, and life around him would be like an inconvenience,
I didn't want to leave the table, and she kept telling me, let's go. I said, I don't want to go to a floor show. I'm going back down the table. She said, no, I want to go to the floor show. And I was so engulfed in the worldly filth that I was involved in, and she didn't know anything. And I grabbed her by the neck. And I was choking her, but not going to kill her or anything like that. But I was emotionally wanting to get back to the table to finish or get even with what my debts I owed downstairs.
And what's a sucker want to do? He wants to get even. He says, the next time I bet, I'm going to get even. I know I'm going to get even. But the problem when you're a sucker, even if you get even or winner, you never quit. Because it's the high that gets the grip on you. And it takes money to keep the high going. And since it's addictive, progressive, and dangerous, when you start out making a small bet, it's addictive. So what happens? It gets progressive, because if you're betting $5 and $5 and $5, you get a little rush off of that. But now you're betting $50, and that's a little stretch for you. What happens? You get a little bit more of a rush. There's a little bit more excitement. The adrenaline's going a little bit stronger, and it progresses and it progresses. It keeps more money and more money to keep the high going until it becomes dangerous.
Finally, she let me go, and I went back downstairs and never got to take her to the show that I remember of.
I resented, at that time in my life, the father that I wanted but I couldn't have. And again, you got to bring my mom into this. My mother was the peacemaker.
My mother came back and she was just totally dismayed because it was a totally negative experience for her.
I don't know how far I went to stop her, but I know one thing. I had to get back to that table. That's all I thought of. And she was just a beautiful wife wanting to spend a night with her husband.
No, I was not aware that my dad choked my mom.
There's no way you can justify that when you have a beautiful wife that loves you and been with you and running your businesses and her business too, and finally get to Las Vegas, and she's interrupting my lifestyle now. And I can't continue on doing what I want to do.
there's different ways that we can address the actions in our lives. We can find ourselves going after these actions in a compulsive way. And when we go after them in a compulsive way, there's still that need inside of us that's taking us to these places. But we have the ability to just say, you know what, forget it. I'm done with this thing. And when we can get a little more frustrated with it, and when we get to the frustration level, we let it go, and maybe we turn somewhere else or turn to a different thing that we think might be our solution. Addiction doesn't allow for that. Addiction says, no, you keep going. There is no such thing as stopping. And no matter how deep that pit gets, and no matter how far that hole goes, logic is gone. It's no longer about, does this make sense? The addiction says, you keep going, and nothing else matters. So even though I can logically look at things on paper, or I can logically think about things and say, okay, but every time I do this, bad things happen, or I keep losing at this game that I'm playing, the addiction says, it doesn't matter. You keep going until you win.
When I went back myself to Las Vegas, I was there one night, and all of a sudden I was gambling. I stood for 22 hours. I don't want to say this isn't very nice, but I couldn't go to the bathroom. I was gambling, captivated by that spirit of gambling. Prostitutes were walking around, women doing this and that. I stood throwing dice for 20-some hours. A man came one night after I'd gambled 22 hours, and he said, Mr. Reed, he said, I was here yesterday, and you were here, and I went home and slept 8 hours, and I was here 8 hours, and I come here and you're still here 8 hours. He says, why don't you just go upstairs? He said, you still got credit here, and he showed me of around $25,000, which would be maybe worth $200,000 a day. And he said, you go upstairs and take a nap and clear up your head, come on down. He really almost was a compassion looking angel almost to me, but regardless, I went upstairs in that motel, and I looked in the mirror, and I thought to myself, well, okay, I'll take a 5-hour nap and I'll go back down. I went to a table, and there was a Gideon Bible. When I took the Gideon Bible, all right, I turned around, took the Gideon Bible, looked at it, opened it up, and shut it up, set it down, and went to bed for 5 hours. But went back downstairs and started gambling for about 20 more hours. And that's when I lost all my credit, everything. I couldn't have no more cash, no more credit. Then, guess what? Then I decided to go over and play another game they call Keno, where you see all the losers in Las Vegas, a form of bingo. I'm over there playing Keno on my last $5 because I already had my meals paid for before my plane took off to come back to Youngstown, Ohio.
They say that heroes are usually the most silent people. And the biggest hero in this whole story really is my mother. And I haven't cried in 20 years. The things that she endured to keep the family together. I don't know how she did it. She put up a lot of crap. If he wasn't running around with 30 different women, if he wasn't losing $50,000 at the gambling table, if he didn't just go through 2/5 of liquor, just to keep the family together. The biggest heroes are often the people that are most silent.
Donna, it wasn't me. It was something inside of me, a hold of me, controlling me, that I had no conscience, no mind, no nothing. And I'm so sorry. so sorry what I did to you and my kids. And your love, you showed me love, but I didn't know how to love at all. It was all me. And I'm just so sorry that I hurt you so much. And I love you. I do. So I come back to Hermitage, Pennsylvania. I owed Las Vegas some money. I said, I don't know what I'm going to do. I told my wife. She still didn't know anything about this. I come back, and my motel then was being repossessed because of non-payment because of my gambling debts. So one day, I had to tell my wife, I said, look, I'm not gambling. I owe all these bank. I'd signed my wife's name to I don't know how many loans at that particular time. The banks started coming in and crediting me, and they turned around and repossessed my motel. And I owed Las Vegas about $20,000. At that time, I had built my accounting practice up pretty good because it was upstairs in the motel. I had all these businesses going. I had 4 or 5 businesses being run out of that motel. I turned around and sold my accounting practice, which I had built, for $20,000. I gave $15,000 to Las Vegas on the 20 debt and kept $5,000. And I went back in the cellar of my home, and my contract said I couldn't do accounting, but evidently they had bad attorneys. It said I couldn't do income tax returns. I started doing income tax returns down in the cellar of my home. And meantime, I was at this particular time still gambling and doing all the things that I was not that was controlling me.
I think Don was at the point where Don was Don. He was the almighty king. He had a very successful business. Everybody liked Don, but then again, how many times do you hear everybody likes a drunk? And this is basically where Don was.
I know that success to him was a big thing. You know, that's what he kind of lived on and thrived on and wanted. That's where he got his recognition in life, you know, and it was so important to him.
He owed many banks thousands of dollars, and I know that was not a good point in his life, and I know right then and there the guy was broke.
When we hit breaking points in our lives, it's a little bit of a reminder to us that we need to make some changes. And we develop them culturally, we develop them personally, but there's breaking points that we all can hit. And when those occur, it's easy to be seen as somebody who failed, who didn't measure up, didn't hit the standard, whatever that standard is, however we are defining that. If we have those in personal levels, you've got people with depression that have just personal standards that they don't match up to. You've got cultural standards that you can apply yourself to, and everyone else applies them to you. And now you're sitting in a spot where you feel 100% failure.
My wife had went to a prayer meeting while we were in my home. My business is in my cellar. She come home one night and she said, hey, Don, she says, guess what? I got saved. And of course, I didn't even know what saved meant. And she said, if I get raptured here tonight, she said, you know, you'll be missing me. I said, well, I didn't know what raptured meant. I thought what it meant rupture because I played basketball. That was what it meant to me.
When she finally gave up, she accepted the Lord as her Savior. And she started praying for my dad and had her friends in prayer circles.
One afternoon, I got down on my hands and knees after Donna got saved in Sharpsville, Pennsylvania, in a couch in my living room, the same couch where 2 years before another pastor had come out to our house and was counseling us. And I even prayed on my hands and knees 2 years before that just to pacify my wife. You know, and now that same couch, I got down on my hands and knees. When I come up off that couch on November 22nd, 1974, I put down the bottle and picked up the Bible. And for the first time, I saw my 2 sons come down off the bus into my house, down the driveway. And I come down and I said to my 2 kids, I said, your daddy's come home. And they come down the driveway and I hugged them both. And my wife come along and I told her that I got married, got saved too.
Knowing Don, you got to know his disposition. He was He was on the verge of breaking often, and because a lot of people were praying him in. He had no idea how many people were praying behind his back. And Joni and I, we made him understand that. So, did I see a crack in Don's life? Yes. And that crack was the Holy Spirit, of course, starting to work on him. And he started to accept it. And because he accepted it, we were able to slide in there a lot, and we became closer to Don and Donna. And I hope that it was instrumental. Was there a change in him? Yes.
God gives us all second chances. And I'm thankful that I understand that you have to give someone a chance. You have to forgive. Just like my mother forgave and forgave and forgave and forgave and forgave. Until, finally you have to throw in a towel at one point. But then she accepted the Lord and everything was redeemed, and the prayers helped, and all of a sudden he got on his knees and accepted the Lord and came back. And he never gave up with studying the Bible, and he also never gave up trying to make up for his past with me and my brother and my mom. A lot of times said, boy, I'm sorry I was such a, piece of dirt.
I was not born an alcoholic. I was not born a compulsive gambler. And environmental has a lot to do with addictions today. A lot of people try to blame this or blame that. No, I knew I was doing wrong. No one had to tell me. But my wife and I went to that prayer meeting. They started praying behind my back. And as a result, November 22nd, 1974, in my living room, in that couch, the second time on my hands and knees, I got up off my hands and knees, and as a result, I started my Christian walk.
Don's transition was nothing short of a miracle. And although he tried many alternative options, there wasn't but one answer for Don.
And we started ministering together, her and I started telling people my testimony. And that was exactly the same day that God changed my life. And I haven't had a drink, gambled, adultery in 40-some years as I stand in front of you people here today and tell you that what gambling and alcohol and drug addiction and all these addictions, and I'm not just talking about drinking, gambling, sexual, I'm talking about all the addictions today that people are involved in.
The first time I think that I ever heard Don get any kind of a testimony was my first husband, Wayne Titus, and I were at the Sharpsville Methodist Church, and Reverend Williams had asked anybody if they wanted to stand up and give a short testimony. And everybody knew that Don had become a Christian. It just kind of spread through the community. So pretty soon Don stands up, he grabs the pew in front of him, and he was really shaking. And he said, I want everybody to know this is the first Christmas in a long time that I'm not drinking, I'm sober, and I love the Lord Jesus Christ. He came into my heart. I forget, it was a short time ago, like maybe a month or something. And everybody in the place started to clap, and they were crying because Don got saved. Don got saved, answered to a lot of prayers in the community.
When I used to pray for him all the time and tell him about the Lord, he'd go, yeah. But I said to my girl, I said, I don't know, it doesn't look too good. And then one day, Betty Evans from Niles, Ohio, the pastor's wife, told me that Don Reed accepted the Lord or something. I said, you're kidding. I said, you're kidding me. Guess what happened? It wasn't within a week the phone rang. Guess who was on the phone? Don Reed. Gonna write a book? He wanted me to write a song, Now I'll Bet on You, Lord, and then it went further on to Crossing Pass.
There was a change that came not only gradually, I could see it with my taxes. Not that he did anything wrong. When we went in and talked to him, his first 15, 20 minutes was talking about the Lord. And so we knew Don had made it, and he was broken down and accepted and became a changed man.
When I first, and the relatives as well, we first found out that Uncle Donnie had learned about God and started becoming a Christian and becoming reborn again. I think a lot of us, myself personally, when you see someone being such an opposite kind of person, it was a little hard to believe. because you wonder how one person can do this and then the next minute be changed and, be that person that's, God and Christianity and everything. But as he starts speaking, and really you can tell by the way he speaks that he believed it and he truly was a reborn again. And I think the more people talk to him, they recognize that he wasn't, some of those people kind of fake it, and we knew I knew that it was an everlasting thing for him, and I was happy for him.
And I had talked to friends of his years after he stopped drinking and became a Christian. I'd say, and these are big time gambling buddies and drinking buddies. I said, did my dad really stop cold turkey like that? They said, Doug, your dad literally stopped. No DTs, no withdrawals. He got off his hands and knees that day, and we haven't seen him since, no matter how many invitations we send or anything like that.
They repossessed my motel. I still owed all the creditors. And then one day, the Lord in the cellar of my home said, I don't want you to declare bankruptcy. And I went like, what'd you say? I'm only making $6,000 a year. And I owe many, many banks. I owe all these creditors. So I made a list of every one of these debts that I had. Put them down on a piece of paper and put down, I'll pay $5 a month here, $10 a month here on the banks. I had a certain banker that went to bat for me with all my creditors. And he said to me, he went and convinced the board of directors of the McDowell National Bank at that time to give me a break because I owed them 4 or 5 loans in that particular bank for car loans, business loans, and so forth. So I started paying off my creditors.
Don came to a point where finally he said, basketball isn't my life. My business isn't my life. He just came to the point where he simply said, Jesus Christ is going to be my life. And that's where he took off.
I owed all the, not only banks, but all the credit, the other kind of creditors that loaned you $600, $500 and so forth. I had 2 or 3 persons sign loans for me. I owed them. So over all these years, I was finally paid Las Vegas off. But the main thing is that at that time, I was making $6,000 a year. And I'm raising 2 kids, a house payment, all these payments, and my accounting business started expanding so much.
I had heard about Don's past through the radio ministry he had and listened to interviews he was doing on that program and got to know him basically. And then, of course, being friends with his wife, we started hanging out more and I spent more time at their home. I saw his way of being with people that had been in that lifestyle. He would take them off the street, feed them, and share Jesus.
It was hard to believe what God was doing for me. My house on Moorfield Road in Hermitage, Pennsylvania, was now an office down the cellar. We were doing tax returns over there. I had 3 or 4 or 5 employees. My son started working for me. He started working for me at that particular time. And down in that cellar of my home, we were getting so big. So one day, I went down the highway on Route 18 in Hermitage, Pennsylvania. And at that particular time, there was a McDonald's across the street, and there was a house. And I saw a lady standing in the yard. And I went up to the lady. I said, ma'am, if you ever want to rent this house out, is it possible you could rent it to me? She said, sure. Well, they're moving out next week, and you can have this house. I said, I can only afford $300 a month. She said, you can have it. So I turned around and moved my accounting practice from the cellar of my home into Route 18 there, and it started growing and growing and growing.
You really need to focus on the bad because nobody really will appreciate the good because they're complementary, they're mutually complementary. And unless you really understood where he was and what kind of a person he was, you can't fully appreciate what he is now.
I was used to these sheriffs coming up and down to my house all the time, serving notices to me, but this sheriff come up, and I knew him too. He said, Don, I hate to do this, but there's another lien on you. And I said, what do you mean, not on me? He said, it's on the building you're in. He said, it's going to go up for foreclosure. He said, the lady hadn't made a payment for 3 years, and it's going to go to a sheriff's cell. Now, I don't have any money to buy this building, so I started praying, and God gave me names of 3 people who loaned me $15,000 apiece, which is $45,000. And the bank said, if you make that down payment, you could bid up to $150,000, which was the lien at that particular time, the foreclosure amount due.
The contrast of after when I became his neighbor was was there were lots of cars in his driveway again, but this time it was for Bible study. And there were lots of singing and praising. There was lots of good things. And I was always invited to go over and see what it was about. I could see a big change in their lifestyle. They were always together doing things, and they were much more loving, and the partying stopped. It was good partying.
I went to the foreclosure. Me, my son, his wife, Karen, Donnie, Karen, my attorney, and there was 3 attorneys for 3 different banks on that foreclosure. And we were in a courthouse in Mercer, Pennsylvania on a foreclosure. And I'm praying, oh Lord, don't let nobody show up, because all I can do is bid up to $150,000. That was what the lien was, the foreclosure amount was. I turned around and we're sitting there, me and my son, nobody there, and the sheriff walks in ready to do the foreclosure, and we are shaking. All of a sudden, in the back room comes a man that doesn't have some clothes on, which I thought, these guys got the money. He's got to raise that bid on that property. So anyway, the sheriff goes up, raised the man and said, this foreclosure property went through the formalities, and he said $150,000, and I'm sitting there shaking, my son's shaking, his wife's shaking, Donna's shaking, my attorney's there, 3 other attorneys, and he said for $150,500, my attorney jumps up and says $150,500. The other 2 attorneys couldn't care, couldn't do anything because they got all their mortgages out, $150,000. I purchased that building for $150,500.
Uncle Don has impacted my life by wanting me to share my Christianity with our family and everybody. He wants everybody to be saved. He has such a heart. Sometimes he can be a little straightforward and in your face, and people don't like that. I think that's one thing that in our family that sometimes bothered people. But I know his heart, and I know his heart is he wants everybody to be saved, especially his family. And he's, just always been there whenever I needed to talk to him about anything. I know I could call him and talk to him. And I know he was thrilled to death when I called him the day that I said I got saved.
For 2, 3, or 4 years, I was at that particular property, and one day another man walks in to me, a man who had a real estate company in Hermitage, Pennsylvania. He said, we have somebody who would like to buy this property. Would you like to sell it? I said, how much? He said, $400,000. And I said, my wife's being in the real estate. I went to her and she said, no, we don't want to sell that. We'll just stay at our house. They come back a week later and they said, well, how about $500,000? And I said, no. I said, I paid $150 for it. I said, no. They come back another 2 weeks later, said, how about $600,000? Well, I said, that's starting to look pretty good with all these debts I owed. So they come back, I said, how about $615,000? That included the closing costs. They said, sold. So they went, I sold that property for $615,000. I was able to pay, just like God had told me down in the cellar of my home, don't declare bankruptcy. The years before, when I was operating my business out of the cellar of my home, he said, don't declare bankruptcy. I was cleared, as you know, almost a $500,000 profit. Paid off all my creditors that I had promised to when I went to them. Many of them just believed me. I started paying them a little bit every month. The banks started falling down, shall we say being paid. They were all paid, and I moved down to where I'm at now at 475 South Beaufort Drive in Hermitage, Pennsylvania, and I bought a property down there, and that was in foreclosure. So that was in for $125,000. So I went down there and bought that property, put in a few dollars in that property, and probably today that building is worth $500,000 to $600,000.
Donna, for many, many years, gave a lot of her life to Don, and Don gave himself back to her, and it was very evident. I think that them working together to get free of the debt that had caused, his past life had caused, and I was here for the mortgage burnings, and we had a big bonfire and just burned it all up because that was years of his past that he was setting fire to that night. And so many of us were just so encouraged. We had a prayer meeting at their home, and that was a very important time for them, and they were very close, and it was a wonderful relationship.
My accounting business was going so great. In the meantime, as you know, I got saved. I'm a Christian, and I'm sitting in my office one day. I get phone calls. I appeared on the national television, 700 Club twice, PTL, the old PTL, today with Lester Hall, Cornerstone out of Pittsburgh. All these places started asking my testimony. I started sharing what Christ is doing in my life. And I tell the same thing when I was on national television, Pat Robertson show. They say, what happened to you, Don? I said, I got sick and tired of being sick and tired of being sick and tired. Now, I know it might not make sense to you out there, some of you people, but let me tell you, there had to be a better life when I got on my hands and knees in my old home there. I said, there had to be a better life. I got up on my hands and knees and I haven't drank, gambled since.
I met Don Reed through a friendship. A friend of mine is a friend of his, and he introduced me to Don. And a lot of the things in our lives were similar, us being both successful athletes in our backgrounds, and just really had interest in his life and the success and also failures of that. And he also needed some help in the television show that he does, and I committed myself to work with him and help him.
I've known Don for many years now through Crossing Paths Television, and he's kind of taken me under his wing. He's been a spiritual father to me and has taught me many things about what it means to have a relationship with Christ, the difference between a religion and truly living out your faith. And no doubt that my life has been changed through what Don has taught me.
And all of a sudden, a man from down around Butler, Pennsylvania, come to me and said, Don, I have a television permit for a TV station in Hermitage, Pennsylvania. He said, I heard you speaking at a full gospel businessman. And he said, and the Lord said to go see that man. And he said, if you want to get something done, go see him. Well, the always saying is, if you want to get something done, go to a busy man. God keeps a busy man busy. He come around and told me, he said, Don, I'll give you this permit. You and I will take this permit. We'll start a TV in Hermitage, Pennsylvania, but we have to have $50,000 within a month. So I gathered a whole bunch of men in Hermitage, Pennsylvania together, and they met in my office on Route 18, okay? And we could only raise $5,000. In the meantime, we got in contact with Russ and Norma Bixler from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And you know what? When we did that, Russ said, I'll tell you what, we'll buy the permit off you for $1. We'll buy it off you for a permit. We'll put the tower up, and we will start what they call a channel low-powered station in Hermitage, Pennsylvania. We will start that channel, and you can have free airtime for your taking care of the property up there. So now I'm going into the television business. Free. And Russ Bixler, they turned around, we sold the permit to them, and the Shenango Valley now has the first 24-hour Christian television station they would have never had if God hadn't chose me to bring television into Shenango Valley and the surrounding communities.
Don Reed's character is probably one of the things that has made me keep with him or stick with him in his ministry over the last 8 years. I've gotten to know the man, not his past, and not what a lot of people see now on the cameras on his television show, but I've got to know him personally. And I see the relationship that he has with his wife now and how he leads his life. I see the true character in the man. And that's really why I've decided to work with him and help him with the television show and be a part of his life. It's because of his character, the true character of the man, not a person's past, but who they are right now. That's what has really impressed me about Don Reed.
Crossing paths together, working hand in hand. Good to see your brother take a stronger stand. Working as a family, the storms will always weather. Crossing paths together, on that day we're sure to stand.
My ministry is thriving. It's called Crossing Paths. When I was sitting in the cellar of my home, God gave me the name of the ministry called Crossing Paths. I wanted a name that didn't glorify Don Reed. And as a result, the name Crossing Paths come up. So Crossing Paths is now growing. I've written a book called Now I Bet on You, Lord. That was way back in '74, and that was completely sold out. And then I met a lady by the name of Florence and Jim Byris, and they come along and she wrote 2 or 3 books involving my life. So now the ministry was growing. One day, we was up in the mountains, and we were speaking up at Shiloh Ranch, and Donna fell walking down the hallway to our room, and we just thought it was an ordinary thing. And when she fell, she got up, and then one night she come back from selling real estate, and she stumbled in my garage, and her eye got buffed up and everything, and I used to sing a song, Funny Face, and here she is with a black eye singing that song, Funny Face. We tried all the doctors in the area, and we went to Cleveland Clinic and walked in there, and they analyzed her, and they said she got Lou Gehrig disease. And that's something that we know is hard. And I had 7 or 8 girls that I put them on the payroll to stay with her when I wasn't there. Because some of even people indicated, why don't you just put her in a home? I said, never, never. She was the one that stuck with me. She asked me to buy her a dog. She bought a little white dog. We trained the dog, and the dog would sit 5 foot from the bed, and after we would give her medicine, and to mesmerize away, she would take the dog, and the dog would run and jump up on the bed with my wife. Donna was the hero of all this. She knew now what my gambling problem was, never brought it up. Brought paychecks home from the real estate business. Asked if she could have $10 out of it. And I was paying all my gambling debts when at that particular time. And she had a thing my son Doug developed. It was a laser red. It was a little pencil with a red light on the end of it. And we developed an A through Z board. And she could talk to us through that I-W-A-N-T, breakfast, lunch, go to the bathroom, by moving her head. For a couple of years, I had to take her in the bathroom and hold her up while she took a shower. She in turn passed away December 22nd, 2005, and as a result, she passed away, and it was awful hard because she was praying for me. This is a woman that's a hero in my life. When she died, the little white dog we took away, the bed was still there. Everybody in my house saw this little dog sitting there, would not move. He said something. The dog, we called him Pookie.
Donna was very much in love with Don, and she was saying how a lot of the past that has happened, she said she can just put it behind her because all of the people that Don had helped to get into heaven by coming to know Christ was worth it all. So she just like is so proud of him, and she was just so, I don't know, she just loved him. I had lots of memorable moments. They were always so giving and kind and very good neighbors. But I think I really, really became close to them when Donna was sick and I was taking care of her, and I was in the home a lot. So I thought I saw a lot of the caring and the love and the devotion that they had for one another and for other people, and how other people came and really helped out and, you know, just gave their time, and it was just a really good experience.
If I could talk to my mom again right now and discuss the past, how did you do it? How did you I can't fathom in this day and age with 50% divorce rate how you weren't a statistic. I don't understand how you could have done it. And it just taught me love of a family, that, you know, someone's got to be the binding glue. And she became the binding glue. So, and if I could talk to her again right now, I would say, Mom, I turned out fine. I'm all right, because me and Dad have a great relationship now. I love my father more than anything. But again, if you understand the 180-degree nature of who he was then versus who he was now, and who I saw him become over the years, things are different. So I'd tell her, we aren't fighting anymore, you know? So rest in peace, we're not fighting. He's a great guy. And he's more than made up from the past, in my eyes.
People ask me, have you been able to forgive your father? I said, well, certainly. Of course. You know, in the early days, it was kind of wait and see attitude. But yeah, certainly I've forgiven him, sure.
Whenever we give our lives to Christ and we live the way that God has called us to, we learn that our identity isn't about the things that we do, and it's not about the things that we can accomplish or what other people think of us. Our identity is designed and based in who God says that we are. And God says, you're my child. And first and foremost, that's who you are.
Over the years, I got to spend a lot of time with Don, and just going out to eat with him, going out to lunch or wherever we go, I realized how big of an impact Don really made on the community. There's so many people who know him, so many people who have had their lives personally touched by his ministry and by his life, because they know who he used to be, they know what he came from, and they know what he's doing now. And no doubt Don's sphere of influence is very, very broad.
During the 70s, it was very hard here in this community with jobs. My husband lost his job, so now he's unemployed. And so we started working with Don in a food pantry out of our house. And what Joe and Don would do is they drive into Cleveland every week, and we pick up all kinds of food. And we fed every week probably about 150 to 300 families. Whoever came to the door, we fed them. And Don paid for the whole thing during that time.
What I am impressed with personally about Don's past is to see where God has brought him from. It's not the things that he necessarily has done in the depths of darkness, but it's where God has brought him from. And that's what's really touched my life, touched my wife's life, and the people around us, even at my ministry and my church. I mean, they all know Don, they all love Don. And to see that God can do that for Don Reed, he can do it for anybody. And that's a word of encouragement to us all.
Don's life had taken a radical change. Now, he couldn't go back to the past and change what had happened. But God's grace is available to all of us, but we must choose it. I recently had an opportunity to sit down with Don. Help us to transition from the early years of your ministry, not quite to what you're doing currently, but how does that tie together with who God called you to as an audience or a people group? You really are able to minister or desire to minister to those that had very similar addictions that you had in your life. Tell us about that.
Yes, because gambling has become such a big problem in this world that word got out. I went on the 700 Club twice. I was on Lester Sumrall. I was on TBN out in Arizona. I was on Cornerstone Television in Pittsburgh. I was on CTN in Florida. So all my people heard about me speaking against gambling, because how many pastors or preachers or churches are really preaching against gambling in this country today, because it's such a acceptable condition today, a normal way of living. So then I started witnessing in my own personal life when the people would come in to do a tax return and they had this alcohol problem, a gambling problem. The people downstairs in my office would be doing tax returns and they say, my son, my daughter, they would refer them to my office, which is upstairs, and I would come in and then I could just my testimony and tell people how God delivered me from not only gambling, but alcohol, women, drinking, booze, everything that you could possibly, all these addictions. So I would be different. I would be not only witnessing to gamblers, but alcoholics or women or sex problems or whatever they came. I had the opportunity to use my talents, as you said, right across from that desk.
Deception and lies, addictions will keep us from God's best in our life. Whether it's gambling, pornography, whatever that addiction is, it will keep us from stepping into all that God has for us. Jesus said, behold, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice, I will come in and sup with them and them with me. What he's saying is, whatever's going on inside of here, and if you're trying to deal with it under your own power, he was speaking to the church. He says, I will come in if you will open the door and be the very center of your life. I will help you fight the battle.
When you're in this journey, and I talked about how friends may disappoint you, and this is what Don talks about a lot, because he had relationships with people prior to that, where friends will let you down, family members will let you down, but see, Jesus will never let you down. He said, I'll never leave you nor forsake you. And see, that's the transition of Don Reed. That's what really wraps everything up. I mean, this was a man that had no real purpose. He was out of control. I was out of control. A lot of the athletes are out of control. A lot of people are out of control. But until we really had that transformation and had that personal relationship with Jesus, then we actually found our life. There's a scripture in the Bible that changed my life, and it says this: for those that try to gain their life, they'll lose it. But those that try to gain it will lose it, but those that lose their life, for my name's sake, Jesus said, they're going to find it. And that's it. That's what happened to Don. That's what happened to me. And that's the story of his life. That's how to sum it up.
Redemption means to me being restored back into full communion with God, being justified by what Christ did to me, that now there's no block between me and God. Now there's no death. Now the curse that came into the world in my life through sin is no longer has power.
Redemption is when you ask Jesus to come into your heart and you give him your heart and just totally surrender to him, and he changes your life. He changes your whole being to something beautiful.
Okay, so redemption to me is a freedom from everything placed on your life, everything that's been placed on your life by others and by their judgment call on you. You're free. When you feel that freedom, you know that there is a God and he loves you and you're redeemed. That's what it means to me. I'm free.
Well, redemption to me is the highlight of the future for anybody who would call upon the name of the Lord, because Christ has given us a second chance.
I definitely see redemption in Don's life. He has a total 360 because he is just almost unrecognizable from what he was before. And he's just a very good testimony to everyone, and very kind, loving, and always his main is to show Jesus to everyone.
What does redemption mean to me? It means being given a second chance at your life and changing your life around to make it right in God's eyes and in your own eyes. You know, you have your conscience and you know what you're doing is not right a lot of times. And so thankful that God is always there for us and always ready for us to be redeemed.
I think redemption to me is an opportunity that we all should be able to have and take. if I got that definition correctly, that, it gives you a great opportunity to allow yourself to know about God and to become a person that you want to be when you are with God, and have that opportunity to prove that to Him and do that for yourself. And I'm so glad that I'm so proud that my Uncle Donnie has turned into the man that he is today.
Redemption is whenever someone else gets me out of my jam. I'm in a spot where I can't do anything about where I'm stuck. And the redeeming part is that they not only take me and get me out of the jam, they restore me to where I once was, or where I belong. Let's put it that way, to where I belong. And redemption at that point is 100% about grace, and it's undeserved. And it's not something that I could ever do for myself.
So what does redemption mean to me? Redemption, I think, means more like forgiveness and change for the better, and making up for something.
Redemption is restoration. Redemption is ransom. It's recovery. It's to buy back.
What does redemption mean to me? Redeeming means, you've been bought, purchased out by the Lord. He has bought your soul in layman's terms. I guess people seek redemption when they look back and they realize what they've done negatively.
What does redemption mean to me? As a pastor, I've been privileged to see many people come to know Jesus. And redemption means a turnaround, a change. And Don changed. He changed tremendously from where he was to where he is today. Anyone that gets to know Don, how can I say that? You better get ready to hear his testimony, because he's going to sit you down over a coffee and he's going to just tell you all. And when you get up and leave, you're going to understand what redemption is all about. It's a new life, and Don definitely received the new life.
Don Reed is an example for those who have unfortunately found themselves at the end of their rope, at the bottom with no visible way out. Yet, through God's grace, he was able to turn his life around and move from the darkness of hell into the light of eternity with God. What about you?
Don Reed influenced my life by actually helping me get saved. I've worked for Don for 28 years. I started in 1989. I guess it was 7 years while I was working with Mr. Reed. I really thought he was pretty much of a Jesus freak. One day, it just was like a click in my brain that I should really investigate this a little bit more. I grew up Catholic, and I went to church. I love God, but I knew there was something else that he had that I wanted to have. Mr. Reed was definitely the guiding factor in my salvation.